Welcome to the Heartbreak Chronicles, where every story is a raw reflection of life. Hit that subscribe button to stay tuned, give us a like to show your support, and share this episode with your friends. Don't forget to leave a comment and let us know what you think. Now, let's dive into today's story. In a luxury villa overlooking the Pacific Ocean in the San Francisco Bay Area, Richard Brooks, 57, is standing in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows, gazing at the rolling waves in the distance. His gaze seemed to penetrate time and space, returning to those glorious days of the past. Richard was the CEO of one of Silicon Valley's leading technology companies, and with his keen business sense and exceptional leadership skills, he took a small company on the brink of bankruptcy to the top of the NASDAQ. However, fate always likes to play jokes. Just as Richard's career was taking off, a rare ear disease crept up on him, slowly eroding his hearing. "Your coffee, sir," the butler said softly, placing a steaming cup of coffee on the table next to Richard's hand. Richard looked back and nodded his head slightly in greeting. He picked up his coffee and took a sip. The bitter flavor spread across his tongue, just like the complex emotions he was feeling at the moment. Not long ago, Richard had to resign as CEO at the insistence of his wife, Emily, and the company's board of directors. Now he is just an ordinary investment manager, utilizing the contacts and experience he has accumulated over the years to navigate the capital market. Richard turned toward the den, his eyes sweeping over the family portrait hanging on the wall. In the photo, Emily, 55, is smiling brightly, her vibrant green eyes seeming to tell an endless story. Emily is a renowned fashion designer whose work is regularly featured in Milan and Paris fashion weeks. Emily's character is a stark contrast to Richard's. She is outgoing, warm, compassionate, and always easy to relate to. Richard, on the other hand, is more introverted, rational, and prefers solitude and reflection. Perhaps it was this complementary personality that made their marriage last so many years. Richard sat on the leather couch and thought back to their 3 children. Eldest daughter Sarah, 20, is in her sophomore year at Stanford University, studying computer science, while 15-year-old twins Emma and Ethan are still in high school. Sarah inherited her father's rationality and her mother's enthusiasm and excelled in her grades. Emma loved music and art and had a lively personality. And Ethan was the family sportsman and a star on the basketball court. The corners of Richard's mouth rose involuntarily at the thought of the children. Despite career setbacks, family life remains his greatest solace. The family often travels together and explores the beauty of the world. Richard especially enjoys taking the family to remote islands to enjoy the tranquil beaches and turquoise waters. However, just behind this seemingly perfect family life, a small shadow is creeping in. It was a normal Friday night, and Richard had just finished his day's work and was about to go upstairs to rest. Just then he heard Emily on the phone in the kitchen. "Really, you have to come?" Emily's voice held a hint of excitement. "Just like last time, we can go on a boat ride, walk on the beach, and dive together. It's going to be fun." Richard frowned. Emily's tone sounded a little strange, like she was trying to convince someone of something. But even more disturbing was the fact that Emily seemed to be referring to last time, but they hadn't traveled with anyone recently. Just as Richard is about to push his way in, Emily suddenly notices his presence. Her expression instantly became flustered, and she nearly dropped her phone on the floor. "Oh, Richard!" Emily exclaimed, her right hand gripping her cell phone tightly. "You scared me." Richard looked at the unnatural expression on his wife's face, and a twinge of doubt rose in his mind. "Who are you talking to?" he asked. Emily's eyes flickered for a moment before she gave a forced smile. Just a friend. We were discussing plans for our next trip." Richard nodded and didn't press the issue any further. He turned toward the living room, but his mind was filled with questions. Emily never hid anything from him, so why was she acting so strange this time? At dinner, the family sat down and discussed their upcoming trip to Italy. Richard noticed that Emily seemed distracted, looking at her cell phone from time to time. "By the way," Emily snapped, "Jason said he wanted to join us on the trip. What does everyone think?" Richard put down his knife and fork and looked at his wife in confusion. "Jason? Jason who?" Emily smiled slightly awkwardly. It's Ethan's friend Jason. He texted me the other day and said he'd love to go to Italy with us. Richard turned to his son. Ethan, did you invite Jason? Ethan looked confused. What? I don't remember having a friend named Jason. An awkward silence fell over the table. Richard's gaze swept back and forth between Emily and Ethan, suspicion growing in his mind. Emily hastily changed the subject and started discussing what places to visit in Italy. But Richard couldn't listen anymore. His mind kept replaying Emily's call from the kitchen and the look on her face when she had just mentioned Jason. That night, Richard lay in bed, tossing and turning. Emily seemed to be asleep, but he couldn't calm down. Years of experience in the mall had taught him that something was creeping up on him, and he was still in the dark. Richard closed his eyes and tried to convince himself it was just a misunderstanding. Emily is so kind and loves her family. How could she possibly do something to betray him? But who the hell is that Jason guy? Why is Emily acting so strange? These questions continue to swirl in Richard's mind like a cloud over their once happy family. He knew that if he didn't get to the bottom of these things, he would never be able to rest easy. With that, Richard begins his secret investigation. He decides to spend the next few days watching Emily's every move closely, hoping to find some clues. Little did he know, however, that this decision would change their lives forever, taking them into a spiral of betrayal, lies, and pain. As the night wore on, Richard finally fell into a restless sleep. Outside the window, the moonlight poured over the calm sea as if foreshadowing the coming storm. This seemingly happy and fulfilled family is standing at a crossroads of destiny, about to face a test that will destroy everything. The sunlight poured through the portholes of the plane on Richard's face, and he closed his eyes, trying to get a moment of peace on the long flight. However, inner turmoil follows. "Honey, are you okay?" Emily asked with concern as she gently held his hand. Richard opened his eyes and forced a smile at his wife. "I'm fine, probably just a little tired." Emily nodded, but Richard didn't miss the flash of nervousness in her eyes. Since that strange phone call, Emily's behavior has become increasingly erratic. She was often distracted, checking her cell phone in secret, and even texting late at night. The plane landed slowly at the small airport in the 5 fishing villages of Italy. The sun was shining, and the air was filled with the characteristic salty scent of the Mediterranean. The group dragged their luggage out of the airport lobby. "Jason!" Emily suddenly shouted, her voice laced with undisguised excitement. Richard followed his wife's gaze and saw a handsome young man walking toward them. He looked almost 20 years younger than Emily, was stylishly dressed and elegantly mannered. "Emily, long time no see." Jason gave Emily a warm hug, then turned to Richard and extended his hand. "Hello, Mr. Brooks. I'm Jason Carter. It's nice to finally meet you in person." Richard held Jason's hand, but a strange feeling flooded his heart. He'd never heard Emily mention the man, yet their interactions seemed so familiar. "Jason is a young entrepreneur I met at a business dinner," Emily explains, "and we've collaborated a bit on clothing design." Richard nodded, forcing down his misgivings. He decided to remain silent for the time being and continue to observe the developments. The group checked into a luxury vacation villa by the sea in 5 fishing villages. Richard stood on his balcony, looking out over the turquoise sea and thinking. Behind them came the sound of Emily and Jason laughing as they discussed tomorrow's schedule. "Honey," Emily said as she walked over to Richard, "tomorrow Jason is taking us to a secret beach that only the locals know about. Do you want to come along?" Richard shook his head. "I may have to take care of some work emails. You guys go ahead and have fun." A flicker of disappointment flashed across Emily's face, but was quickly replaced by excitement. "Okay, I'll see you tonight then." Early the next morning, Richard sat alone on the beach, flipping through the business information on his tablet. In the distance, Emily, Jason, Ethan, and his girlfriend are getting ready to go scuba diving. A pang of sourness rose in Richard's heart as he watched Emily in her sexy bikini, talking and laughing with Jason. He suddenly realized that it had been a long time since Emily had smiled that brightly at herself. As night falls, Richard sits on the terrace of his villa, listening to the sounds of laughter in the distance. Emily and Jason, they had just come back from the bar and both looked a little tipsy. "Richard, you're still awake?" Emily walked up to him with a drunken blush on her face. Richard shook his head gently. "I'm waiting for you." Emily suddenly leaned down and gave Richard a passionate kiss. Richard froze, smelling Emily's faint odor of alcohol and a hint of unfamiliar cologne. That night, Emily was unusually forthcoming, and they had an intimate encounter after a long time. Richard should have been happy, but an inexplicable uneasiness welled up in his heart. Is Emily's enthusiasm due to the alcohol or something else? Richard wakes up early the next morning to find Emily's bed empty. He walked to the living room and saw a note. "Honey, Jason and I went on a local wildlife tour. See you tonight. Love you, Emily." Richard frowned. Emily knows she's always been interested in wildlife, so why wasn't he invited along this time? And why is it with Jason again? Richard was distracted throughout the day. He tries to focus on his work, but images of Emily and Jason together keep popping into his head. It wasn't until late at night that Emily and Jason returned to the villa. "Sorry, honey," Emily apologized. "Had a little trouble on the road, so I'm back late." Richard nodded and said nothing more. He noticed Emily's hair was a little messy and there was a small red mark on her neck. That night, Richard tossed and turned, unable to sleep. He was awakened by the sea breeze in the early hours of the morning and decided to get up and go to the living room for a glass of water. Just as he pushed open the door to the living room, the scene in front of him sobered him up instantly. Emily and Jason were snuggling intimately on the couch. Emily was wearing a sexy silk nightgown, and Jason's hand was resting on her waist. Richard held his breath and quietly backed away. His heart was beating so hard his ears perked up. He smelled an ambiguous scent in the air, one that was unique to intimate encounters. Back in the bedroom, Richard sat on the edge of the bed with his head in his hands. He finally had to face a harsh truth. His beloved wife was probably having an illicit relationship with a man 20 years younger than her. For the next few days, Richard was like the walking dead. He mechanically participates in family activities, barely maintaining a semblance of peace. But his insides were turning over, pain, anger, disappointment, resignation, all sorts of emotions intertwined, almost drowning him. Emily seems to notice Richard's abnormality and starts to become extra attentive. She often took the initiative to talk to Richard, asking him how he was feeling and even suggesting that the two go out on a date alone. But Richard knows that behind these actions, it may just be Emily's guilt and cover-up. Jason also became cautious. He no longer appears around Emily as often as he did before, but keeps a deliberate distance. But Richard was able to pick up on the subtle eye contact and offhand physical contact between them. Finally, on the last day of the trip, Richard made a decision. He's going to check the home security cameras as soon as he gets home. If his suspicions are correct, then this video will be the key piece of evidence in uncovering the truth. As the plane slowly took off, Richard looked out the window at the fading Italian coastline with mixed emotions. The trip was supposed to be a wonderful family reunion, but it turned into a suffocating nightmare. He didn't know what would await him, but he knew that no matter what the truth was, their lives would never be the same again. Back home in San Francisco, Richard felt a wave of exhaustion hit him. He watched Emily skillfully arrange the luggage and direct the children to their places, a gentle smile on her face as usual. It was all so familiar, yet it was so foreign to him. "Honey, you look tired. Want to get some rest first?" Emily asked with concern. Richard shook his head. "I'm fine, probably still a little jet-lagged. Why don't you guys get some rest, and I'll go to the study and take care of some work." Emily nodded and placed a soft kiss on his cheek. "Don't get too tired." Watching Emily's back as she left, Richard had mixed feelings in his mind. He took a deep breath and walked into the study, locking the door. He turned on his computer and started looking at the home security footage. The video is from 2 days before they left. Richard fast-forwarded through the footage until he saw Jason show up at the house. His heart began to race and his palms sweated. Emily and Jason are shown sitting on a couch in the living room and appear to be having a normal business meeting. But Richard noticed that Emily's hand touched Jason's arm absently, and Jason never took his eyes off Emily's face. Suddenly, the scene shifts and Richard sees Emily and Jason hugging in the hallway. The hug lasted significantly longer than the boundaries of propriety. Richard's hands began to shake, but he forced himself to keep watching. The next image struck Richard like a thunderbolt. Emily and Jason were intimate in the guest room, and it was so passionate, so forgettable. Richard felt a wave of vertigo, and he had to pause the video and take several deep breaths to calm himself. Richard turned off his computer and slumped in his chair. He finally got hard evidence, but the truth was harsher than he had imagined. His wife, the woman he'd loved for over 20 years, had betrayed him, and right there in the home they shared. It was late at night, and Richard was still sitting in his study, thinking about what to do next. Should he confront Emily directly? Or should I just calm down and make a plan first? The early morning sun shone through the curtains into the study, and Richard realized that he had been sitting in his chair all night. He stood up, moved his stiff body, and decided it was time to face reality. Richard walks into the bedroom, and Emily is still asleep. He gently shook her awake. "Emily, we need to talk." Emily opened her eyes in a daze and saw Richard's serious expression, which snapped her out of it instantly. "What's the matter, Richard? Did something happen?" Richard took a deep breath. "I found out about you and Jason." Emily's face instantly turned pale. "You? What are you talking about? I don't understand." Richard opened his laptop and played the security footage. Emily's entire body froze as she looked at the picture of herself and Jason in an intimate scene. "Richard, I can explain." Emily's voice quivered. Richard shook his head. "No need to explain. The video has said it all. I just want to know, how long did this relationship last?" Emily lowered her head as tears began to well up. "A year. Maybe more." Richard felt a wave of vertigo. A year, if not more. Throughout this time, he had thought he had a happy and fulfilling family, when in reality, it was all an illusion. "Why, Emily?" There was pain in Richard's voice. "Is our marriage that bad for you?" Emily looked up at Richard with teary eyes. "No, Richard, it's not like that. I love you. I've always loved you. It's just that Jason makes me feel young and wanted. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't help myself." Richard listened quietly to Emily's explanation, the anger in his heart gradually being replaced by a deep sense of disappointment and sadness. He loves Emily, but at the moment, he doesn't know if he can ever forgive her. "I need time to think," Richard concluded. "I don't know if our marriage will survive, but I do know that you have to be completely honest with me if we're going to have any chance at all. Tell me everything and don't hold anything back." Emily nodded, unable to stop the tears. She began to talk in detail about her relationship with Jason, how it began, how it evolved, and her internal struggles and conflicts. Richard listened quietly, his mind filled with mixed emotions. He loves Emily, but at the moment, he's not sure that love is enough for him to forgive her for her betrayal. After a long conversation and reflection, Richard finally made a decision. He proposed a 3-month trial period. During this time, Emily must completely cut off all contact with Jason while they go through marriage counseling together. "This is our last chance," Richard said gravely. "If you are dishonest or contact Jason again during these 3 months, our marriage is completely over." Emily nodded tearfully. "I understand, Richard. I'll prove to you that you and our family are the most important thing to me. I'll do anything to regain your trust." Richard looked at Emily with mixed feelings. He didn't know if it was the right decision, but he knew that if he didn't give the marriage one last chance, he might regret it for the rest of his life. Over the next few days, Richard and Emily begin the difficult journey of rebuilding trust. They attend marriage counseling together to learn how to communicate better and how to deal with each other's needs and feelings. Emily also begins psychotherapy to try to understand why she acted out her betrayal. However, the process of rebuilding trust is not easy. Whenever Richard sees Emily using her cell phone, he feels a pang of unease. Whenever Emily says she's going out to meet a friend, he can't help but wonder if she's lying. Emily is also trying to prove her sincerity. She offered to keep Richard informed of her trip and even offered to share her cell phone location. She tries to make up for her mistakes in every way she can to regain Richard's trust. Thus, in a complex mix of truth, lies, remorse, and hope, Richard and Emily begin their trial period. They both know that it will be a difficult journey, but they also both hope that what awaits them at the end of that journey will be a new beginning rebuilt on trust and understanding. Late at night, Richard stood at his bedroom window and looked out at the twinkling city lights in the distance. He remembered all the good times they had shared and the pain of Emily's betrayal. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew that whatever the outcome, the experience would change their lives forever. The 3-month trial period slipped away. In San Francisco in the fall, the golden sunlight pours down on the streets, coloring the city with a warm glow. In the Brooks family mansion, however, the atmosphere remained stark. Richard sat in his study, tapping his fingers on the desktop. Today was the day he and Emily had agreed that they would confess everything to the kids. The decision wasn't easy, but Richard felt that if they were going to start over, it had to be based on complete honesty. "Dad, you wanted to see us?" Sarah gently pushed the door open, followed by Emma and Ethan. Richard took a deep breath. "Yes, boys. Sit down, your mom and I have something to tell you." Emily walked in, her face pale and her eyes slightly red. She sat down next to Richard and nervously twisted her fingers. "Boys," Richard spoke up, his voice shaking a little. "Your mom and I have been having some problems." Sarah frowned. "Is it because you're getting a divorce?" Richard and Emily looked at each other, and Emily gently shook her head. "No, honey, we're not getting a divorce. But I've done something wrong, hurt your father, and hurt this family." Emily took a deep breath and continued, I had an inappropriate relationship with another person." The room was instantly and horribly quiet. Sarah's eyes widened, Emma covered her mouth, and Ethan lowered his head, fists clenched. "Is that Uncle Jason?" Ethan looked up suddenly, anger and disappointment in his eyes. Emily looked at her son in surprise, then nodded slowly. "I knew it." Ethan stood up, his voice shaking with anger. "I saw you guys sneaking out on vacation." I can't believe you're doing this, Mom." With that, Ethan stormed out of the room. Emma cried and followed her out, leaving Sarah sitting quietly, looking at her parents with complicated eyes. "Why?" Sarah asked softly. Emily lowered her head, tears streaming silently down her face. Richard took her hand and squeezed it gently, then turned to Sarah. "Sarah, it's complicated. Your mom made a mistake, but she's sorry and trying to make amends. We decided to give the marriage a chance because we still love each other." Sarah nodded and stood up. "I'm going to need some time to digest this." After that, she too left the room. Richard and Emily are the only ones left in the room. Emily leans on Richard's shoulder, crying silently. Richard gently stroked her back with mixed feelings. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in the house became incredibly tense. Ethan refuses to talk to Emily, and Emma often hides in her room and cries. Only Sarah tries to play the role of mediator, but her eyes are also filled with doubt and disappointment. Emily fell into deep remorse and depression. She started seeing a psychiatrist to try to understand why she made the choices she did. At a therapy session, she finally worked up the courage to confess more details to Richard. "The other day at my daughter's basketball game," Emily said softly, her eyes drifting off into the distance, "Jason was sitting next to me. We chatted, and then, I don't know what happened, and we walked out into the parking lot. It all happened so fast, and by the time I realized it, it was already too late." Richard listened quietly, the pain in his heart coming in like a tidal wave. But he forced himself to remain calm and continued to listen to Emily. Afterward, we both felt guilty and agreed never to talk about it again. But we can't help ourselves." Emily's voice choked. "I know it's ridiculous. Jason is so much younger than me, but he makes me feel young and attractive." Richard took a deep breath and tried to calm his inner turmoil. "Emily, you've always been attractive. It's just that I may not have made you feel it." Emily looked up at Richard with teary eyes. "No, Richard, it's not your fault. It's me being selfish. I failed you. I failed our family." Richard took Emily's hand. "We're all at fault, Emily. I ignored your needs and didn't notice the changes. But right now, it's important that we face these issues together and work through them together." Emily nods and squeezes Richard's hand back. In that moment, they all felt a glimmer of hope, a glimmer of the possibility of a fresh start. Over the next few days, Richard and Emily begin to re-examine their relationship. They attend couples communication classes to learn how to better express their needs and feelings. Richard begins to pay more attention to Emily's changing moods, while Emily works to rebuild Richard's trust in her. Slowly, the atmosphere in the house began to ease. Ethan, while still rarely speaking to Emily, is no longer as hostile as he once was. Emma starts doing yoga with Emily in an attempt to rebuild the bond between mother and daughter. Sarah, on the other hand, often has long talks with her parents to help them understand each other better. One night as Richard and Emily were lying in bed, Emily suddenly said, "Richard, I've been thinking that maybe we should start over." Richard turned his head and looked at her with some confusion. Emily continued, "Maybe we could date again and get to know each other again, just like when we first met." Richard was silent for a moment, then smiled. "Are you proposing to me, Emily Brooks?" Emily smiled back, tears glistening in her eyes. "Maybe. Will you give me another chance to be my husband again?" Richard gently kissed Emily's forehead. "I do. But this time, we're going to be honest with each other and trust each other. No secrets, no lies." Emily nodded, tears slipping down her face. "I promise, Richard. This time, I'll spend the rest of my life proving how much I love you." And so, after a difficult process of betrayal, pain, and rebuilding, Richard and Emily decide to start their marriage over. They know that there is still a long road ahead and many problems to solve. But right now, in each other's arms, they felt a peace and happiness that had been missing for a long time. Outside the window, the night was deepening in San Francisco, and the lights of the Golden Gate Bridge twinkled in the distance. Richard and Emily sleep in each other's arms, their hearts filled with anticipation for the future. They know that if they love each other and trust each other, there is no difficulty that cannot be overcome. Golden sunlight pours over the hills of the San Francisco Bay Area, bringing a new day to the city. At the Brooks family mansion, Richard wakes up early and quietly watches Emily sleeping beside him. The years have left faint traces on her face, but in Richard's eyes, she is still the same girl who makes his heart sing. Rising gently, not wanting to wake Emily, Richard walked out onto the balcony. The morning air carries the salty smell of the ocean, and the outline of the Golden Gate Bridge looms in the morning mist in the distance. He took a deep breath and felt the hope that a new day brought. The past year has been a tough one for the Brooks family, but it has also been a year of rebirth. Emily's betrayal used to be like a sharp blade that pierced deep into Richard's heart, but time and each other's efforts slowly healed the scar. "Good morning, dear." Emily's voice came from behind her, gentle and slightly apologetic. Even after deciding to start over, she still shows a hint of guilt every now and then. Richard turned and smiled at his wife's good morning kiss. "Good morning, Emily. How are you feeling today?" Emily leaned over Richard's shoulder and whispered, "It's nice, especially with you around." The two smiled at each other, the warmth of knowing and loving each other showing in their eyes. This tacit understanding is a precious gift that they got only after going through the storm together. "Dad, Mom, breakfast is ready." Sarah's voice came from downstairs, interrupting the warmth of the two. Richard and Emily smiled at each other and walked down the stairs together. In the dining room, Sarah was setting the last of the omelets, Emma was helping pour the juice, and even the ever-so-silent Ethan had taken it upon himself to help set the table. It's a cozy picture that would have been unimaginable just a few months ago. When Emily's betrayal is revealed, the entire family is thrown into chaos and pain. Ethan used to express his frustration with silence and anger. Emma vented her confusion with tears, and Sarah, as the eldest daughter of the family, tried to play the role of mediator. However, over time, with the help of the family therapist, the children slowly learned to understand and forgive. They saw the efforts of their parents to save their marriage and felt the strength of their family coming back together. "Any plans for today?" Richard asked as he enjoyed his breakfast. "I have an important design meeting this afternoon," Emily said. "I might be late." Previously, such words might have aroused Richard's suspicion and uneasiness. But for now, he just nodded and said, "Okay, be careful on the road." "Do you need me to pick you up?" Emily gave Richard a grateful look and gently shook her head. No, I'll take a cab back. This calm dialogue is the best proof that they have rebuilt their trust. Emily now takes it upon herself to tell Richard about her schedule, and Richard has learned to give trust and space. By the way, Sarah snapped, Uncle Jason messaged me last week asking how we've been doing. The table was instantly quiet. Jason's name, once taboo in this family. Emily looked nervously at Richard, wondering how he would react. Richard took a deep breath and said calmly, How did you respond? Sarah hesitated and said, I told him we were fine, but we want to keep our distance from him. Richard nodded and reached for Emily's hand. You did the right thing, Sarah. We don't hate Jason, but we need our own space to heal and grow. Emily looked at Richard gratefully, tears in her eyes. In this moment, she realized once again how lucky she was to have such a forgiving and understanding husband. After breakfast, the children went out on their own. Sarah went to college and Emma and Ethan went to high school. Richard works from home while Emily gets ready to head out for her design meeting. Emily. Richard called to Emily as she was about to leave. I love you. Emily's eyes glistened with tears. I love you too, Richard. Love you very, very much. Richard felt a surge of relief as he watched Emily's car pull out of the driveway. Their marriage has been through the toughest of tests, but has grown stronger through the ordeal. They learned to communicate better, understand each other's needs more deeply, and appreciate each other's company more. In the afternoon, Richard received a text message from Emily. The conference ended successfully, and we have gotten a great response to our new collection. I'm going home now and can't wait to share the good news with you. Love you. Richard smiled and replied, Awesome. I'm so proud of you. Take care on the road. We'll be waiting for you at home. In the evening, the family gathered to celebrate Emily's success. The table was filled with laughter, and it was one of the most relaxing and enjoyable dinners in months. In a joyous atmosphere, Richard looked around at his beloved family. Emily is excitedly telling the kids about her new design concept, and Sarah listens attentively, offering a few suggestions now and then. Emma scribbled in her sketchbook as she listened, while Ethan, though outwardly seeming less interested, Richard noticed the corners of his mouth turn up slightly. At this moment, Richard felt incredibly happy. Their family weathered the storm, but ultimately came out stronger. They learned to forgive, they learned to trust again, and they learned to value each other more. It was late at night, and the children went to their rooms to rest. Richard and Emily sat on the swing set in the backyard and looked up at the star-filled sky. Richard, Emily whispered, thank you for not giving up on me and our family. Richard gently put his arm around Emily's shoulders. We've been through so much together, Emily. Our love and family are worth fighting for. Emily leaned on Richard's shoulder and murmured, We'll have a better future. Richard kissed Emily's forehead. Yes, we will. As long as we're together, there's nothing we can't overcome. The night breeze brings the scent of the ocean. Richard and Emily snuggled up to each other, their hearts full of anticipation for the future. They know that there will be challenges and difficulties in life, but as long as they love and support each other, nothing can shake their family. The Brooks family rediscovered harmony and happiness on this quiet evening. Theirs is a story of betrayal, forgiveness, rebirth, and hope. It teaches us that even in the darkest moments, with love and courage, we can always find our way to the light. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's story. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. If you have a story to share about your own or someone else's experience, please feel free to contact me. Take care.